Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Our Beloved Church. I'm sorry I am late today, and yeah, I very much apologize. But I want to thank you so much for being here. Uh, if you could do me a favor and just hit the like button as you're coming in. And also, if you haven't already subscribed, if you would do so, if you've been blessed by this or if you've been blessed by any of our programs, if you would subscribe and share with other people, it would really help us out as we are a new and upcoming podcast. And today we are going to be talking about a subject that will soon affect every single person here in the United States, as well as in the world. And so before we start, I would like to ask for the Lord to give us wisdom as we proceed. So if we could just bow our heads. Our dear Heavenly Father, as we start this time, we ask, Lord, that you would be here with us, that everything that we say, Lord, that you would give us just the right spirit and the right words to be able to express what it is that our brothers and sisters each need to hear. We thank you, Lord. We ask that Jesus would be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen. So today, as you know, I have a special guest with me. Her name is Natalie Furman, and she's going to be sharing about this issue of um, the doctrinal warfare and how religion is or can be weaponized. And so it's going to be a very important, interesting subject. The reason that we're interested in this subject, it has to do with what is happening in our government, what just happened in the last month, for instance. Last month, the Heritage Foundation came out with a special report, and I'm going to share my screen just to show this special report to you. It's right over, let's see. I guess we're right here. I put it on this document. So we're going to start this from here. And you can see the special report, Saving America by Saving the Family, a foundation for the next 250 years. And to end America's family crisis, policymakers and civic leaders should treat restoring the family home as a matter of justice. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. One of the things that it recommends for family health is to have a uniform day of rest. And so it talks about blue laws. We used to have blue laws in this country. We still have quite a few that are open in many states, but it calls for a universal day of rest in that, like, well, instead of you being able to choose what day of rest it is, that it would be a day of rest that everybody would take. And it cites Sunday. For instance, the U.S. Postal Service does not deliver regular mail on Sundays. Most organized youth sports avoid Sunday competitions, and most banks are closed on Sundays. The ever popular Chick-fil-A restaurant, this is a restaurant that is owned by Christian people who make it part of their mission to help people, understand more about the Christian faith, I believe. It closes its restaurant on Sundays for the benefit of its workers and their families. And so this is something that the Heritage Foundation is wanting to have done possibly by July 4th of this year. Very interested in having this done very quickly. So this begs two questions for me, okay? I don't know about for you. One of them is, who is the Heritage Foundation, right? Like why should we care about what the Heritage Foundation says? So this is a right-wing think tank that was founded in 1973. It was responsible for many policies in conservative American government. it developed a series of manuals for leadership beginning in 1981. So it started in 1973, and then it started developing this series of manuals for leadership. And with its very first manual that was published in 1981, Ronald Reagan took it and ran with it. And it's estimated that at least 60% of the over 2,000 policy recommendations that the Heritage Foundation made in its first manual were implemented by Reagan in his first year of presidency. The seventh edition in 2018, it claimed that Trump implemented 64% of 334 policies made for his first presidency. And then the ninth edition in 2024 provides the policy agenda for Trump in his second presidency. And one of the things that it includes is Project 2025, which also calls for a day of rest. So the second question that I have, the first question is, who is the Heritage Foundation and why would we care about what they have to say? So we know that this is a think tank that is very in, involved in making policy. If it's not involved in making the policy, it seems that it's at least the mouthpiece for the government as far as letting us know what is up and coming in the policies that are going to be made. And so then the second question for me would be why we care about this universal day of rest, because having any kind of holiday, day off sounds like a pretty reasonable, good thing. But if you are a Bible student, and you should be if you are a Seventh-day Adventist, if you're a Bible student, you know that we have been concerned about the United States making a law to cause people to worship on Sunday. And we've been talking about that ever since we became a church. And so it's based on a number of different things, but let's take a look at this verse in Revelation 13. It talks about how we believe that to be the United States, had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. So we have been concerned and sharing with people at our prophecy seminars, there is going to be a Sunday law. And for decades now, I think a lot of people have been maybe inwardly, maybe in disbelief about this, because for so much of our history, we have had this feeling of safety and protection because of our Constitution. But, so as we see this Sunday law now possibly coming to us in 2026, July the 4th, there's a possibility that this might be the case. It makes us wonder, what is it that we need to do? What is it that we need to focus on? And so today I just wanted to share a few things. We're going to talk about, how it is that this has happened, how it is that the American people have come to this point where we would allow this to happen. But what is it that we are to do at this time? I think that's one of the most important things. And so I want to look at Revelations chapter 18, and starting in verse 1, it says, "And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory." We Seventh-day Adventists believe that this angel comes down at the time when judgment is about to close, for the earth at the time that the Sunday law comes into existence. And so as we see this Sunday law happening, and we realize that it's the time for the fourth angel to lighten this earth with the glory of God, let's look and see what is the message that this fourth angel, God's people, are to proclaim. It says, he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Babylon is fallen. That's our message. Isn't that amazing? It says that for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kingdoms of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So we're seeing governments, the kings of the earth. We're seeing business people, the merchants of the earth. These have all been working in collaboration with Babylon. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. We believe that Babylon is a fallen church system. We believe that Babylon started out supposedly worshiping the Lord, but that Babylon fell. And there are God's people still in Babylon. And our purpose at this time is to reveal who Babylon is so that God's people would be able to identify who this Babylon power is and realize that they need to come out. Because her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. So, as we look at all the evil that is happening right now, we can see what is happening with the Epstein files, for instance. That seems to be a subject that is really coming on our radar, and we are having issues with a lot of maybe police brutality. Is it an issue of immigration and, the laws being upheld? Who is behind all of this evil? The New World Order, the elites. We hear a lot of these things, a lot of these terms being bantered around. And all of these entities have their role and their place in this drama that is being played out. But who is it that's behind all that is in the evil in the world? We know that it is Satan. We know that it is this fallen angel. But what religious organization is he working through today? Today, we are going to be talking about Babylon, its objective, how it is all about religion. You might think it's politics, you might think it's certain issues, but it is all about religion. It is ultimately all about worship. And we're going to go back a little bit in history to look at the first Babylon and to look at the characteristics of it, and then to see how it reinvents itself, how it's reinventing itself and coming back more and more overtly so that you can't really identify and put your finger on it exactly. But we hope to be able to help you to see the characteristics of Babylon so that you might be able to identify it. So let's look at the originators of Babylon. So looking at Genesis chapter 10, it says that the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. And Cush begat Nimrod. And just to remind you, Ham was the son of Noah. He had a son named Cush. Cush had a son named Nimrod. And this son, Nimrod, began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Shinar. So this is how Babylon began. Now, Nimrod's name is very interesting. The Hebrew root of the name Nimrod is marad, or to rebel. In rabbinical literature, his name is interpreted as he who made all the people rebellious against God. And historian, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, maybe Ho, Hoe or Ho, I'm not sure. It tell us that Semiramis was married to Cush. So Semiramis, the wife of Cush, was the mother of Nimrod. She was known as the Queen of Heaven, Jeremiah 44, verse 19. So she was someone that was worshipped in her civilization. Cush was also a prominent figure in Babel, but then he was superseded by Nimrod. And after Cush's death, Nimrod married his own mother, Semiramis. Nimrod died, and Semiramis became pregnant through an adulterous affair. Semiramis claimed that her pregnancy was done by Nimrod through the rays of the sun, and that her baby was Nimrod reincarnate as god of the sun, or Tammuz. And you actually do see Tammuz mentioned in the Bible, at least in Ezekiel. I don't know if there are other places that Tammuz is mentioned in the sun. You also in Ezekiel find that there are God's people who ultimately, in the last days, one of the worst abominations is that they are worshiping the sun. And so we can see all of these things here at play here. You see sun worship. Semiramis telling the people that Nimrod has somehow impregnated me, though he is dead, through the rays of the sun. Think of how powerful that is. Semiramis uh, also, you see here incest. You see here mother-son worship. You also see here, possibly, I think you could put into here the pedophile situation, because typically children don't necessarily want to marry their mother after they grow up and become adult figures, unless there has been significant trauma that causes them to behave this way. And so you can see a lot of these types of things here in this story. I think that Ham must have been very influenced by the evil that caused God to execute judgment upon this earth with the flood that destroyed so much of the evil there. But because of the righteousness of Noah, his family was saved. And one of the people that was saved was someone who, it seemed, still very much identified with the sin of his time. And he passed that on to his generations. Now, this says that Semiramis developed the satanic religion of Baal worship, including the confessional for blackmail and public fear, secret societies, and the idea that she, as a religious leader, was the only medium to God. So this concept that you have to go to anyone else other than to God to confess your sins, and for you to be able to understand God, you need a priest. No, according to the Bible, you don't. But this was something that came into this false pagan worship. Idols appearing featuring Mother Semiramis and baby Nimrod. Her symbol was the moon. You can find that with Isis and Diana. And Nimrod's was the sun, Horus, Baal, or Sol. Semiramis promoted baby sacrifices and celibacy for priests, foreshadowing Roman Catholicism. She invented death by crucifixion. And you can look this up. You can look up crucifixes in Babylon, and you'll find that they were originally occult symbols in Babylon and Egypt. And some people say that they represent the Tau, which is the T for Tammuz, um, or the T-like letter. I think it's the Greek alphabet or something, isn't it? Semiramis bore another child by her son, Nimrod, while claiming that she was a virgin. He was named Tammuz, who she maintained was the reincarnation of Nimrod or Baal. So I know this is mythology. You can't really prove it or disprove it. But it's just something to consider, and let's just see how if you can find some evidence for it. And so all the things that I am mentioning here, I have tried to look into more other than just some of these authors here. Like for instance, Alexander Hislop, he talks about, so began the worship of Semiramis and the child god and the whole paraphernalia of the Babylonian religious system. So what is that paraphernalia? Let's see. Let's go back. I'm going to confessionals, secret societies, nun habits, priest celibacy, baby sacrifices, and death by crucifixion. That's just to name some of them. So you can see that the characteristics of Babylon: anger and rebellion against God, characterized by disbelief in the word of God. You can see that religion came into all areas of their life. It was not just in the traditional places of worship, for instance, like in the church. Religion was the essence of its governance, and religion was the paradigm through which it viewed its science. For instance, Babylon was the place where actually pharmakeia began, and the treating of medicine as we know it today, with a listing of the symptoms. Then you have a priest, you have a pharmacist, and you have a physician that will all take part in a religious type of incantation to figure out what kind of treatment to give to the patient. And so religion came into all aspects of Babylonian life. And the objective of all of this, to some degree, was control. Now, you can see what historian Josephus says on Nimrod. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. I want to let that sink in here for a moment. The Bible says that God's gospel is liberty. And when we live in dependence upon God, we find that freedom. It's very interesting. If we try to live apart from God, that's when we start losing that vitality. We start losing that life. We get into slavery. And that's another word, I guess, for tyranny, right? That's what Satan wants to bring upon us. Now, Nimrod also said that he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Very interesting. The mind of Nimrod and why he was so intent on building Babylon. So the characteristics again of Babylon: church-state union, the most powerful way to control people. And the objective of its paraphernalia: control people, causing them to have dependence upon man. So I want to just show you again the paraphernalia of Babylon. Here's the confessional, secret societies. If you Now, for those of you who are watching, I might not have all Seventh-day Adventists here, and I want to welcome anybody from any other denomination, any other religious belief. And I do want to say that as I share these things, it is not in hatred for any individual, or I want to say that the reason that I'm sharing this is because we love our fellow brothers in other denominations and in other religions, and we just want to let them know, we want to sound the alarm that Jesus is coming soon. And we want to help identify who Babylon is and how to come out of her, God's people. So if you look at the Catholic Church, for instance, there have been some secret societies there. Opus Dei, for instance, the Jesuits. Um, there is this priest celibacy. Now, if you look at Babylon, it might be difficult to find this priest celibacy thing. It's not like it's gonna all come up in the way that they do their religion. But for instance, there is the worship of Cybele or Sybil that came into more the Grecian government. But as you look at all the pagan religions, I do think that you have to think about Ecclesiastes saying that there is nothing new under the sun. And so realize that these religions, with all their iterations, they came from an original pagan style of worship. And so if you look at the pagan goddess Cybele, the priests that worshipped Cybele, they had to castrate themselves and dress like women. And they were more of this androgynous, transgender type of priest. And so this priest celibacy, I do believe, was something that started possibly, probably in Babylon. I believe that the author of the two Babylons, Hislop, that he talks about both the nun lifestyle as well as pre-celibacy starting there, baby sacrifices, and crucifixes. You know, crucifixes actually go back to Babylon. The first king that was described to use crucifixion was a Medo-Persian king, but he had his Babylonian enemies punished by dying on crosses. Again, the objective is always to control. And so when we look at Revelations 13, you can see that this depicts absolute tyranny, that people who do not worship a certain way, that they will not be able to participate in society, they will not be able to buy or sell. Now, how is it that a church structure, a religious structure that preaches love, for instance, the Christian church, how could it be that this church could participate in tyranny? And according to the book, The Great Controversy, it says that when the early church became corrupted by departing from the simplicity of the gospel and accepting heathen rites and customs, she lost the spirit and power of God. And in order to control the consciences of the people, she sought the support of the secular power. The result was the papacy, a church that controlled the power of the state and employed it to further her own ends, especially for the punishment of heresy. And it goes on to say, in order for the United States to form an image to the beast, the religious power must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish her own ends. So when we see a Sunday law that is on the horizon, we must understand that this has happened, that there is religious power that so controls the government that it is using the authority of the state to speak for it. When the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. And so just for people who maybe are not familiar, I would like for you, as we're talking about this image of the beast, this image to the beast, to look at the original image that is found in Daniel chapter 2, as in the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, whose dream was interpreted by Daniel. And Daniel interpreted his dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, to show that Babylon was represented as the head of gold, Medo-Persia, the arms and chest of silver, Greece, the belly and thighs of bronze, Rome, the legs of iron, and then there are the feet of clay and iron, and we believe that we live in those times today. Jesus is about to come. This is the image of the beast, the original image of the beast. Now we know that according to what we just shared, that this image is church state coming together. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now let's look at all these different empires. So you have the Babylonian Empire. You can see that it extends here, not into Egypt here, but up here into, it looks like not, well, the Caspian Sea. I want you to look at the Caspian Sea is here, and you can see the Black Sea. You can't really see it up there. It's way up at the top of the screen, okay? So, and then here you can see this is the kingdom of Medo-Persia. You can see that Medo-Persia goes all the way up to the Black Sea, to the Caspian Sea, and it extends out even to Egypt. And it goes even further with Alexander the Great. And here with Rome, even a little bit further itself. And so you can see that each empire that has come along has been very interested in total control of as much of the world as possible. This is imperialism. And so this is how these governments have worked and what they have wanted. They have wanted control. Now, all of these too have been church state governments. You know that the Roman Empire emperors, they proclaimed themselves to be God, for instance. And it's thought that in 476 AD that this was the last I think this is considered the official fall of the Roman Empire, 476 AD. However, there was this gradual fall as well. And then you have, like, in 538 AD, a transition from the pagan Roman Empire to the Holy Roman Empire, where Justinian had a decree that established the Bishop of Rome as the head of all churches and instituted laws severely punishing those who will not comply with Sunday laws. So this was a transition to a time. I'm going to unshare my screen. A transition to a time where a church became the government. And this began the 1260 years of persecution for God's people. And we believe that God gave to America a very special period of time and a place of safety through the Constitution that allowed his word to take root in the hearts of people so that it could develop a group of people that could understand and see who Jesus was, that his image could be restored in his people. That right before Jesus would come, that there would be a group of people who could see Jesus so clearly that they could represent him to the world. That's what we believe. And we believe that as that this time is about to be cut short, and that this earth history is about to draw to a close, and Jesus is about to come. So right now, though, is it possible that this Babylonian power, that it is still very much alive and well, and it has just reinvented itself? How is it that we can identify this Babylonian power today? And how is it that America will let Babylonian beast power come in and destroy what God has established? To talk about that more, I have asked my friend Natalie to share with us what has happened in the last 250 years, how we can identify this um, Babylonian beast power. And Natalie, it is 5:40. Sorry, I've shared a little bit longer than I meant to. I hope that I leave you at an okay place.
Yeah, we're fine. I've got my timer on. I'm probably going to let it expire a couple of times so that I can keep myself on track. Anyway. Okay, let's see. I am going to share my screen and let me just make sure I am ready to do that. Oh, I'm always a little clunky about that. I'm going to have another prayer, by the way.
Okay.
Dear Heavenly Father, I just ask that you would please speak through me and share with people what it is, Lord, that has been happening in front of our eyes. Give us discernment to see and also give us understanding to know what we must do and how we must live for the times ahead. So I loved everything you shared because I have been studying a bunch of the same stuff, even though I've gone down a little bit different path. So I'm going to, can you see my slideshow?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, get it onto slide. And, okay. All right, are we there?
Yes.
All right. So I am going to talk about the weaponization of religion today. And I had not actually been keeping up with a lot of things that are going on with the Heritage Foundation. I've been seeing stuff come up in my feed. I'd been researching some other things, and it is funny how it all ties in together. And I still have some podcasts to catch up on with regards to the Heritage Foundation. So if I repeat some things, please forgive me. But that's not going to be till the end. And I hope that you'll be able to see how it all ties together. So let's see. I think I'm going to skip this right now. I was originally due to have a friend over today who was a Catholic friend, and this friend said that they were interested in understanding what is going on in the world. So I put this presentation together using both the American Catholic version of the Bible and the Douay Rheims version of the Bible. And if you're not used to reading that, it sounds remarkably, these verses sound remarkably the same as the King James version of the Bible. So I thought I'd read a couple of things here and then we'll proceed on. The dragon stood, whoops. The dragon stood, I'm going to read out of Revelation 12 and 13. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. And the woman, who I'm going to call the first church for right now, and the biblical substantiation for that is found in Jeremiah 6:2. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1260 days. And there was given unto this woman 2 wings of an eagle that she might fly into the desert where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. Then these same 2 chapters talk about a second woman, which is the second church. And if you are someone who studies Bible history, Revelation, or Daniel, you understand that this woman is called, upon her forehead was a name written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the fornications and the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs. And I wondered when I saw her with great admiration. To understand this prophetically, I have this quick little chart. And we can contrast the two women or the two churches. One is the pure church, the other is the corrupt church. The pure church, when Jesus was born, and his lifespan with the Jewish nation, his period ushered in the Christian dispensation, and that grew into a global movement because it was aggressive in evangelism. There were faithful and zealous preachers. The Bible was translated into Roman and other languages, and there were heroic deaths of the martyrs. The corrupt church, well, the pure church lasted for about 2 to 3 centuries, and the corrupt church proceeded on for the next few centuries of that 1260-year period. And the two churches were tracking side by side, as it were. But the corrupt church was born out of the pure church, and there was a split. The corrupt church started becoming corrupt because it loved position and rank more than ministry. And the corrupt church started hiding the Bible from the people. And finally, the thing that you touched on, Joyce, was that the church imported civil government structure into the church. So the church at the time would have been the Roman Catholic Church and what Protestants know today as the Church of the Wilderness, that can be identified as the Huguenot Church, the Waldensian Church, and maybe some other small churches. And the small churches had a very simple structure. They were very biblical, very evangelistically minded, but the corrupt church grew into a very pontifical structure. And you can read about these two churches growing side by side for the 1260-year period from a book called The History of Protestantism by J.A. Wiley. Now, I have been doing a bunch of reading lately, and one of the books that I have been reading is this book called, you probably can't see that.
If you're blurred, your background is blurred, it won't let you really.
Okay. So this book is called The Rulers of Evil, and this, there was a remark that as these two churches continued side by side until the 1260-year period, after that was a period we call the Reformation. And that was an awakening within the Catholic Church where Catholic Church leaders said, hey, this church is beyond. It's completely corrupt. Terrible things are happening on a continuous basis, and we need to rein it in. In addition to that, there were civil leaders in the European countries that also said, the church is so corrupt, we can't even support the structure of it because it's undermining our civil existence. The morality of the people is just broken. So there was some support for a reformation from civil leaders as well. Although in the beginning, even though it was a bitter war, I think some civil leaders did not see where it would go, that it was going to cost them taking a moral stand. At any rate, there was a painting that was done that this book, Rulers of Evil, talks about. This painting is called, what is it called? I think Paul III and the Counter-Reformation. And this painting is a picture of all of the church officials sitting together. And Paul, who was the emperor of the Pope at the time, was considering all of the events. And there was this figure that was presiding, and this figure, some may have guessed might be the Holy Spirit or some type of divine hand, but this figure, in fact, was somebody named Mercury or a god named Mercury. And Mercury is said to have presided over the happenings of the Counter-Reformation, because at the Counter-Reformation, there was not a point that was accepted by the Reformation. In fact, the Counter-Reformation said, Anybody is a heretic who does not believe what the Roman hierarchy teaches, and a
Mm.
heretic merits the pains of fire. A second point that was established a little later in the Reformation is something from the Peace of Augsburg, which is called Who's the Religion? His the Region. I think it's called Ius Quio Eius Religio. I can't remember, but I've got it in here a little bit later. But it basically means if you can convert a leader, your chances are very high of converting an entire population. And the Society of Jesus was formed shortly before the Counter Reformation, and its purpose was to protect the life of the church. And the Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits, their purpose was basically to forward the aims of the Catholic Church and to maintain the line that was drawn by the Counter Reformation. Now, this figure,
Natalie, can I just ask you, this he is a heretic who does not believe what the Roman hierarchy teaches. That's something that I feel like we're seeing coming even into our Protestant Seventh-day Adventist faith when we say, don't believe anything that is not said by our official church media, for instance, or that maybe you don't believe what we tell you. I mean, don't believe what anyone else tells you about, like, say, for instance, um, the jab or something like that. I mean, like, is that something that is a is more of a Jesuit type of way of thinking that you should only believe what the hierarchy teaches and we have to protect the hierarchy at all expense?
it's definitely a Babylonian system. And as you discussed briefly, the Catholic Church is referred to as the Babylonian system of revelation. And this is a it's kind of a blunt way of saying this, and I have invited my non-religious friends and some of my non-Adventist friends to view this, and I know they will be looking at this. But if you are a student of history, you understand that the Reformation came out of the Catholic Church itself. The Catholic Church had a group of people that said, we've gone too far. We've got to understand and consider what it means to be moral and to be free and to be created in God's image. And there was a second component that also said, we don't want to hear what you say. We are the hierarchy, you obey us. And there it seemed that the true points between the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation were liberty and tyranny. And there is definitely a hierarchy that is in all of the churches today. I would say that was very evident in the last few years that churches were speaking to their congregations and making suggestions about what they should do with their health and their body. And the as congregants would ask, why do you have this authority to dictate over me? We are the church, is the answer. We know best. We tell you, we have the science, we have the spiritual authority, and we are going to use it, and you had better use it as well. And that, I would say, that is typified by the Catholic Church, but unfortunately, the bigger system is the Babylonian system.
Okay.
And the Bible discusses who is behind the Babylonian system, and that is a very satanic, well, it's Satan, and that manifests in everyday life in the Babylonian think system, as it were.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. So the figure that I showed you was Mercury of the Sibylline and Virgilian Gospels, which were the Holy Scripture of Rome. And the Catholic religion started off as a very pure gospel, but it began to incorporate a lot of pagan philosophies. And that individual, Mercury, who was presiding over the um, the Counter-Reformation, is also known as Marduk of ancient Babylon, and he is the main god of the people. And the comment from rulers of evil is, just as Mercury, the metal, draws out impurities and then binds them into a mass that is burned and discarded. Mercury, the deity, uses his intellectual brilliance to play the Pied Piper to impure humanity. He attracts followers and leads their soul to Hades, for which the Greeks gave him the title Psychopompus. He had to charm souls to deceive them into following him any way he could, whether by sight, sounds, or words. Was Sebastiano Ricci, who is the commissioner of the painting, telling us that Mercury was the dominating spirit of the Council of Trent? That is, Mercury is seeming to honor the Bible while advocating unbiblical norms. The Society of Jesus is performing today and in the past the function of Mercury, attracting impure humanity while leaving behind only the pure. And we'll get into that a little bit more about what that means. Well, the Jesuits by 1556 had established 46 Jesuit colleges to conduct something called learning against learning, or the Ratio Studiorum. And this learning against learning was to basically flood out the Catholic hierarchy who were interested in purity and in maintaining the image of God and reforming back to the image of God in the Catholic Church. This learning against learning is scholastics, and the scholastics was to take precedence against the scriptures. And Martin Luther at that time, whom everybody knows as the father of the Reformation that started in the 1500s, because there was an earlier Reformation, he wrote a tract called An Appeal to the Ruling Class. He said, unless you diligently train and impress the scriptures on your young students, the schools will prove to be the widening gates of hell. So, wow, just a minute here. Okay, so the Psychopompus, the sole director of the Jesuits, moved on into a plan for the church politics because they had lost a lot of adherents through the Reformation. And there was a book written by a gentleman named Justin Febronius that was called On the State of the Church and the Legitimate, just a minute, let me move this, the legitimate power of Roman pontiff. And this idea, the purpose of this tract was to discuss that the Roman Catholic Church should be decentralized into little mini churches. For example, the Church of England. And all of these little mini churches would be ruled by kings or princes. They would be kind of like a state church infusion. And these church leaders would be indoctrinated in the colleges, and these rulers would be indoctrinated in the Jesuit colleges. And the churches would be little mini societies that would eventually direct all of their adherents back to Rome. Now, this book was actually written by the Jesuit bishop. Let's see here. Bishop Nicholas von whatever his name is. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. Anyway, and eventually what happened was all the churches started breaking apart, and there were many religious churches, and they all started doing their own thing. And it took a few hundred years, but everybody started moving towards the direction of reuniting back to Rome. What happened next scripturally is the Bible says that the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the river, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And there was another beast that came out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spake as a dragon. And he executed all the power of the former beast in his sight. He caused the earth and all of them to dwell therein, to adore the first beast, whose wound to death was healed. And he did great signs, so that he also made fire to come down from heaven. So the next thing that happened is I'd like to read a little bit out of this Rulers of Evil book. And what happened was that the Jesuits kind of burned themselves up. They were in Europe, but they had a lot of attention focused on themselves. Finally, there were a lot of complaints against the Jesuits because they had been stirring up trouble everywhere. There was a long campaign of false rumors, manipulation of incidents, calumnies, all intent on ascribing to the Jesuits nefarious doctrines, purposes, and practices. And some of these allegations against the Jesuits were that they had incited revolts against nations, especially in Paraguay. There was a Portuguese colony there. They had incited a revolt over there. There had been illegal trading. There had been conspirings to murder a particular king. And then there was a court case that happened. And this court case was of a superior Jesuit in the Caribbean. He had received about $2 million at that time to open his mission. And he obtained this money on a line of credit. He couldn't pay the debt. And so he was taken to court. Once he was taken to court, the Jesuit father at the time, Lorenzo Ricci, was called to produce the constitutions. And when the constitutions of the Jesuits were read, to the world was open every known form of heresy, idolatry, superstition, every tutelage in suicide, legicide, blasphemy, every kind of impurity, usury, sorcery, murder, cruelty, hatred, vendetta, insurrection, and treason. So the whole world is seeing this court case, and they are realizing, hey, these Jesuits are the hound dogs of hell. They are out of control, and they were all sent onto a ship. They were pulled from every single country, and they were sent to a ship, or they were exiled, or they were executed. And the idea was that they all had to be arrested by a certain date. And a particular king said, if a single Jesuit, even though he is sick or dying, is still to be found in the area under your command after the embarkation, prepare yourself to receive summary execution. So Europe was in the process of collecting all the Jesuits and isolating them. Now, the author of Rulers of this Evil suggests an idea that is interesting, that the Jesuits themselves orchestrated this chain of events so they could be publicly thought of as over and done with and off of everybody's mind, and they would be moved to America, or they would be out of everybody's mind. And then the Jesuit father said, hey, I'm going to move to America. I'm going to move everybody to America, to this land of freedom. And we are going to set up shop over there. And the American Revolution was in the process of happening in this time. And all of these public ideas about what freedom would be was also attracting the thoughts of the Jesuits, because the Jesuits said, we can go to America and be a protected religion ourselves. And we can establish camp, we can set up shop, we can operate as we do, and we will be protected by these constitutions, these articles of confederation. And so the author of this book, Rulers of Evil, suggests that that is what they did. Now,
So they were able to escape death, because weren't they supposed to be put to death and this kind of thing? So somehow they were able to escape that and flee to America themselves.
okay, there were Jesuits that were pulled from all kinds of countries. But the Jesuits had set up camp also in Quebec, and there were a number of countries that they were not disbanded from or taken away from. And so they were pulled from those countries and then set up either in Canada or the United States or both. And let's see, there is a statistic in here. Unfortunately, I've lost it, but let's see if I can remember. I think there was at a period of time around 2.5 million Protestants in America. And at that time, there were maybe 25,000 Catholics, including Jesuits and priests and nuns and others that had migrated to America. So the number was relatively small, but there was a remnant of those Jesuits that had been saved from this burning the boats behind themselves, and they moved to America. Mm. So that's the next thing that happened. Well, as everyone knows, the Protestants were moving to America to escape all the persecution that had been happening in Europe. And I found this book. Well, yeah, not that you'll be able to see this book either, but I did find this book. And this book is called Andrew Jackson, Symbol for an Age. It's written by John William Ward. It's a really, really interesting book. I'd like to go back to this verse over here that discusses another beast coming up out of the earth. A Protestant viewpoint of this verse discusses that America is this new power that was rising up out of the earth, and it had twin institutions of civil and religious liberty. And those twin institutions allowed for freedom of religion and freedom of civil government to be practiced. And Protestants that came from Europe were looking for a haven, and this land of America was also allowing the woman of the true church, this Protestant liberty, this Protestant ideal of reflecting the image of God, to develop. And so this, I had known this from a biblical point of view, but in reading this book, it really illustrated the civic point of view that the American character developed during this time, and American qualities of freedom, of independence, of the Constitution in our thinking, the religious liberty, as it will, in our Declaration of Independence. This is how this was formed in the mindset of the Americans, because the Protestants got to America and they were ready for hard work and reading the Bible. They felt that a movement away from nature was a moral and a physical decline. And there was President Jackson was a very popular president in America. One of the reasons that he was so popular was he had won a number of battles, and he was viewed to be educated in nature's school. In fact, the New York Times in 1834 wrote about him that a mysterious light directs his intellect. His mind is clogged by no forms, but it goes with lightning's flash and it illuminates its own pathway. There was a mystique about Andrew Jackson, that he was guided by God, and because he did not have the European trappings of false courts and false learning and fake trappings of civilization, he was a pure man. Now, I recognize that he's a controversial person for other reasons, a controversial president for other reasons. But during his presidency, he fought off threats to the American Protestant freedom and liberty. And he was able to do this because there was this character that had been developed in him, that he and true Americans were not taken from the streets of dissipated and corrupt cities. They were not corrupted by the wisdom of learning. And this learning could be referred to as that ratio studiorum, that Jesuit learning, which is reason of understanding, or European courts and civilization, which would be equal to moral corruption. So
Mm.
there was a very long period in America where this was developed, not only as a people, but in presidents who were considered great presidents, they evinced these same qualities themselves. Now, there were up to the 1850s, maybe 1890s, there was a very strong anti-Jesuit sentiment in the United States. The Protestants were very, very worried about Jesuit presence in the United States, and they were very wise to all of the historical happenings that had been caused by the Jesuits. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that right now. The Jesuits in America. So there was this idea that the Jesuits were using blown cover as cover, that they were all harvested on these ships and they were all left to die. And the Art of War is thought to have been translated by Lorenzo Ricci, the Supreme General, during this time. And one of the things that he translated was this saying from the Art of War: sometimes you will lower yourself and pretend that you were afraid. You will reign weakness so that your enemies open the door to presumption and pride and come to attack you unwisely. And so when the Jesuits came with this cuius regio eius religio, which is this idea, whose is the region, his the religion, and this thought that they would take and shape the churches back to the mother of all churches, they could not do this for a period of time in the United States. They had to be very subtle, and all of their warfare had to be conducted as though they were impotent men and an impotent political force, as it were. But I found an article by America Magazine. It is entitled "Uncomfortable Truths Behind Crazy Jesuit Conspiracy Theory." So this is the Jesuits knowing the Jesuit conspiracies about themselves and commenting on this. And they comment in this article about how the assassination of President Lincoln and JFK, the sinking of the Titanic, to gain control of America's financial system with JP Morgan, that was the fault of the Jesuits. And many other Jesuit conspiracies. But I'd just like to take a moment and say, if you are a Catholic or a Protestant person that is watching this presentation, the assassination of President Lincoln was documented by a church father himself. His name was Father Charles Chinnicky, and he wrote a book about his dealings in the Catholic Church and how corrupt it was. This book was called 50 Years in the Church of Rome. And that is a book that was written by a Catholic talking about the Jesuits themselves. So along with this article that I read is this comment that they quote themselves. They're making fun of this idea, oh, Jesuits could not possibly be in charge of all of these horrible events that happened. And this is what they say: every Jesuit wants to rule the world. The society's goal was the service of Christ's mission, but this emphasis on influencing the influencers also means that from the earliest days, Jesuits have been associated with power and ambition. In other words, they want to influence the elite for Jesus. And so naturally, it makes sense that the Jesuits are at the top of society. And just 10 years after the order's founding, there was a monk who said, "These Jesuits will spread all over the world. They make your princes reveal their hearts and the secrets therein." And in some places, the Jesuits would be accused of being spies for the Vatican. And there was this monk also said the fact that our fully professed fathers take a fourth vow to the Pope and do so in a private ceremony only feeds these claims. The article continues on to say that the Monita Secreta, or the secret instructions of the Jesuits, which was revealed in this court case, supposedly reveals how Jesuits expand their power and wealth. And so part of this instruction says princes and persons of distinction everywhere must by all means be managed so that we may have their ear, and this will easily secure their hearts, and all of these persons will become our creatures, and in the end no one will dare to give the society the least opposition. So basically, this America magazine is commenting on all of the thoughts of the secular world and the religious world, including their own religionists who say that the Jesuits are out of control and they're unwieldy and they will take over every global situation. And their final comment in this article is, "An Emperor Palpatine, eat your heart out." So if you are a Star Wars, if you watched Star Wars, you know that there was a senator who pretended to be the good guy for liberty, and in fact he was a Sith Lord, or you could call him a Jesuit. He was there to disquiet the Federation and to sell the Federation out for tyranny, and that is exactly what has been done. So I just want to talk about a couple of things that have happened recently as well that have been attributed to the Jesuits. The 911, there was a 911 commission that there was a wife, her name was Beverly Eckert, and curiously, she went to a Jesuit school and met her husband at a Jesuit school, and he died in the 911 towers. And I'd like to read to you a little bit of what she said, because she died in an airplane crash that was quite bizarre, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I want to share her comments with you. Let's see. Okay. So can you see this?
Not yet. You haven't shared that yet.
Okay. Let's see.
So what we're sharing right now, you're sharing about, like, as we're talking about Babylon, what is Babylon and this kind of thing. And we're talking about how, you know, in the course of history, the Apostolic Church became corrupted. And the Catholic Church, as we know it, it became as it was because it wanted influence with the state. And then Martin Luther came around, and we had this awakening that we can we can have a relationship with Jesus for ourselves. We do not need to have a human mediate for us. We can go to Jesus ourselves. And this Protestant Reformation was fought against by the Counter Reformation, which was led in particular by this Jesuit organization, this entity within the Catholic Church itself. And so we're finding out about how it has reinvented itself, and how it might be, or we believe that it is playing a significant role today in what is happening in our society. Okay, keep going.
Okay. I'd like to add to what you said, because I would like to add that there have been and there are continuing two parallel church systems that are going today. The Reformation it's just about snuffed out. It will be snuffed out in theory very soon, and the Counter-Reformation is going very strong. The Protestants, or the Reformationists, if you will, if you want to call it that, they came to America to have they received from God a freedom of space to develop a godly image. And the Catholic Church moved their base of operations through the Jesuit to the United States so they could have their religion be protected as part of the public space. And then they used that as a platform to spread out to the world as it was. And so the Jesuits, for the longest time, could not be open. And maybe they're still not open, but they couldn't be open in the United States because too many people understood them and understood their purpose and their history. But that started changing over a period of time. And all these conspiracy theories that were ascribed to the Jesuits today say, oh, that's just ridiculous. It couldn't possibly be the case. How could all of these fantastic things be ascribed to us? And so now I am wanting to read to you from Beverly Eckhart, what she
You can
said
share, yeah.
about, okay, you can see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'd like to read to you what she said, because she said she and her husband were in the insurance business and her husband died in the towers. And she said, I'd like to read a little bit what about this family, and why she thought that the towers collapsing was an impossible thing to have happened on accident or by some foreign policy. She thought, in fact, it was an internal thing that happened in the United States. And so Eckert met her future husband, Sean P. Rooney, at a Jesuit-run academy called Canisius High School in New York. And they eventually got married, and they didn't have any children. They were married for about 21 years. Before Rooney's death, they celebrated their 50th birthday with vacations to Vermont and Morocco. And they obviously love to travel. And when the planes hit her husband was at work, and she said, when the planes hit the tower, Rooney called his wife and exchanged voicemail messages. To get to safety, he made his way to the 105th floor of the building, trying to reach the roof, when he became trapped until the tower collapsed on him, killing him. After Eckert learned about the attack, she went home and stayed on the phone with her husband until she heard the tower collapse. And she describes all of this in a StoryCorps interview. And let's see, I'd like to read her comments about what happened the day her husband died. I've chosen to go to court rather than to accept a payoff from the 911 victims' compensation. I want to know what is so wrong with our intelligence and security systems that a band of religious fanatics was able to turn 4 U.S. passenger jets into an enemy force, attack our cities, and kill 3,000 civilians with terrifying ease. I want to know why, too. It should be 3 if you're keeping track, but skyscrapers collapsed in less than 2 hours, and why escape and rescue options were so limited. Let's see. I want to say to Congress, to big business, and everyone who conspired to divert attention from government and private sector failures, my husband's life was priceless, and I will not let his death be silenced or meaningless. My silence cannot be bought. And let's see, where is it? There is somewhere, I don't know if it's this one. Okay, this is what is interesting. The New York Times publishes some events, and what happened to provoke her ire is that she and her husband were in the insurance business, so she started doing investigations, and she found that Ms. Eckert's penetrating gaze fell on everything from building codes that left the skyscrapers without enough stairways for emergency evacuations to a system of national intelligence that seemed to have a hard time passing email messages from one agency to another. But the work that began in the final minutes of when the tower stood when her husband called and told her that the roof doors were locked and 3 stairways seemed to be impassable. They had plenty of time to get out. If there had been fire escapes in the corners of the building, they would have. Why did this happen? And so she went on to head the 911 commission, and she faced Henry Kissinger, who obstructed her at every single turn. And then what happened to her ultimately was she died in a continental airplane crash. And I'd like to read to you, let's see if I can find it here. It was a continental airplane crash that happened in February 2, 2010. And I remember that because
Was it February 2 or February 12, it says?
I think it says February 2. I was flying Continental on that at that time, and I remember that crash. But what happened was Continental had never up to that point had any type of plane injury. And let me see if I can read to you what happened. Let's see. So there was a stall 800 feet above ground, and this stall caused the plane crash. And this remained the deadliest aviation accident involving this particular type of aircraft that had ever happened. So there was a pilot in command and a lady there was Captain Marvin Renslow, who was the pilot in command, and Rebecca Lynn Shaw, who served as the officer. And they had sufficient hours of flying. There was no reason for cause, but let's see what happened here. There was a de-icing system that had been activated 11 minutes shortly after takeoff. And apparently this de-icing system allowed accumulation on the wings and aircraft, and this supposedly caused the airplane crash. But there was an let's see here. I'm sorry, I'm taking a little bit of time here. Okay, so there was an improper action that pitched the nose of the airplane up that increased the gravitational load and increased the stall speed, and the stick pusher, which applies a nose down control column input to decrease the wing's angle of attack after a stall, was activated, but the captain overrode it and pulled back. And then the first officer retracted the flaps without consulting the captain and made the recovery of the airplane crash difficult. And so there was a crazy pitching of the airplane, and then there was ultimately an airplane crash, and Ms. Eckert died in that airplane crash. And there is some talk that she died shortly after a confrontation with Henry Kissinger, who was obstructing the 911 commission. And Henry Kissinger, she said, "I am not going to let you get away with what you've been getting away with, and I am going to share with the American people what you've been obstructing." And it was shortly after she said that she boarded that plane and had the crash and then died. And so this is just going back to all of these events that that we can assign to the Jesuits for, let's see here, let me get back on here, for their nefarious activities in obstructing freedom and liberty in the United States. And if you remember, of course, after the 911 Commission, there was the passing of the Patriot Act, and America really began to change. If we can look back and say America became different, it was after the Patriot Act passing. And then there was a subsequent Patriot Act. But what is so bizarre is back in 1993, there was another attempt of this very same instance that was trying to happen with the bombings, and it never happened successfully. And yet some years later, 10 years later, it happens, and then America changes irrevocably. So that is the importance of Ms. Eckert and Jesuit conspiracies, as it were. So, okay, are you seeing my slideshow again?
Yes.
Okay. So, so sometimes I hear people asking this question, which is, were America's founding fathers Christian? And sometimes I think to myself, is that even a relevant question? Some people say, why is America going so amoral right now? Shouldn't we go back to these founding fathers and their Christianity? Well, I'd like to review this part of the verse that says, I saw another beast come out of the earth. We believe this beast, we teach this beast based on prophetic and historical insight, that this beast was the United States. It had the civil and religious freedom, but eventually it would speak as a dragon. And so this beast would execute all the power of the former beast in this site, and this first beast would cause the earth and all of them that dwell therein to adore the first beast, whose wound to death was healed, and he did great signs, and also made fire to come down from heaven in the sight of men. I'm not going to get into that a whole lot at this point, but what I would like to say is these two concurrent lines of Christian churches, or churches, the Protestant or the Reformation Church and the Counter-Reformation Church, were running hand in hand, even in America, even at the beginning, and the Bible states that this would happen. And so some of the signers of our earliest documents were Jesuits or Jesuit trained. The Carroll family had three brothers. They were the wealthiest landowners in Maryland and America. They were Jesuit trained at St. Omer's University, and part of the curriculum was casuistry or casuistry, however you want to say that. That is basically clever talking so that you can get out of accountability. And that is a very Jesuit trick that manifests itself in the legal profession, but also in the religious arena as well. There's equivocation saying, well, yes, I did this, but it was excusable for XYZ reason. Mental reservation, meaning, yes, I did do that crime, but I can lie about it and it will be excused according to my mother, Catholic Church, because she gives these reasons. Therefore, if I lie, I am still pure. There was espionage, cloak and dagger diplomacy, guerrilla tactics, and manipulation of public opinion. And the 1902 Catholic Encyclopedia discusses about this family, that they had land on Maryland, and this land bore the name of Rome in 1663 property records, and that this land, there was a portion of this land that was on the Potomac, and they called this section of the river the Tiber. So if you've been to Italy, you recognize, of course, and everybody recognizes these names as very Roman Catholic names. And this is just an instance that this was recorded on public records as transferring Rome to America, as it were. Benjamin Franklin was the Grand Master of Pennsylvania Freemasonry, and if you know anything at a certain level, you are worshiping Satan, and the Grand Master would be at that level. Major George Washington was an initiate into the Fredericksburg Masonic Lodge. William Penn, who was thought to be a Quaker, was called by some of his contemporaries as a Jesuit in disguise. And there was really very bitter warfare in America at the beginning with all of our documents, all of our thinking, our public thinking that was it going to be the Protestant sentiment that was going to win, or was it going to be the Jesuit sentiment that was going to win? And I don't mean to cause distress or a lack of confidence in our documents, because I do believe that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are Protestant and Reformation documents that speak about God's intention to the human family for freedom, to bear his image, to bear his morality. And the intention was to give America and the world a period of time to understand what a benevolent system of government would look like and how that would affect the globe if it was allowed to exist. And it did exist for a period of time. And I gave an earlier talk about this. I think it's called maybe how the New World Order was, how America was brought in the New World Order. And I talked a little bit about these founding documents that there were, especially from George Washington as he left office. He gave America a blueprint of how to stay out of war and how to keep the peace in America. And it was a foreign policy recipe that worked for a very long time. If you wanted to look at some of those documents, I have this book called American Historical Documents, and it discusses treaties with nations. Some of these treaties are incredibly beautiful. I'm shocked that we ever spoke like this. We spoke as a lamb, really, for a period of time with our foreign policy. And some of these treaties are the treaties with the 6 Native American nations. Now, I realize down the road we repudiated all of that and were very tyrannical to the Native Americans. And I'm very sorry that that happened, because the language started out very lovely. There was a treaty with France, with Great Britain, with Russia, Spain, Mexico, and these were some there was a lot of diplomacy in these nations, or in these treaties. That is really quite shocking. I talked about Cuba in one of my presentations, because America was sucked into a war with Cuba, but before they were sucked into the war, they stood up for Cuba and they said, I'm trying to find that over here, that treaty. And they said, you know, Cuba has been oppressed by Spain for a very long time. There have been, here it is, it's called the Recognition of the Independence of Cuba. There have been very abhorrent conditions that have existed in this island just right next door to us. How dare you treat Cuba this way? We are going to advocate for Cuba. We are going to use our Navy and our land forces to give Cuba freedom. And we are going to relinquish any right to exercise sovereignty or jurisdiction or control over Cuba and any kind of islands, except for the benevolent act of just give them peace. That's what we're going to do. So we said that in 1898. And by 1901, we had placed Cuba under a terrible tyranny under a document called the Platt Amendment. And this document is such an aggressive document. Let's see if I can share it.
Natalie,
Yes.
just because we're at 6:38 and we were supposed to talk about the doctrinal warfare and that kind of thing, I just want to know, like, how
We should move ahead. Okay.
yeah, we
Yep.
really have to get to this stuff because
Okay. So, all right, we're going to just skip ahead to that. So we're going to fast forward literally to the doctrinal warfare and program. And I had already discussed some of this in the talk that was how World War I brought America into the New World Order. And basically, America was sucked into World War I through false promises. And then again, this happened in World War II. FDR promised, we're not going to get involved in the war. And of course, in 1941, Pearl Harbor happened and we were sucked into war. But what was interesting is there were a lot of secret meetings that had been happening behind closed doors with Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, and also with our government, the Secretary of States. And if you watch that program, you know that the Secretary of States, the Secretary of War, all of those people at that echelon are always having secret meetings. And here was one of the secret meeting, the outcome. This gentleman, Assistant Secretary of State Francis Sayer, called a missionary that he went to school with, and he said, hey, communism, fascism, and Nazism are threats to the globe and the fundamental threats to the teaching of Christ. We've got to have a conquering faith that will take action against these ideas because Western civilization is about to be swept away. Well, but what had been happening with FDR and Winston Churchill was that they had been having secret meetings planning on how to rule the world. And you can find out about some of that. Oh dear, let's see, how can I, yeah, I don't know how to shrink this down, but you can read about some of that in the National Archives here. And a title of this is William J. Donovan and the Establishment of the Office of blah, blah, blah. Basically, what happened was the OSS was started for the purpose by some organizations and some committee meetings that had been happening for the purpose of setting up a global spy system. And this spy system was recommended actually by Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming, whom everybody who watches James Bond movies had been in association with Aleister Crowley, who was hired by the English government for intelligence purposes, specifically for his occult warfare capabilities. And Ian Fleming was also an occultist. And so we have one occultist consorting with another occultist. And then Ian Fleming was tasked to organize the proposal, charter, and structure for America's OSS. And this whole charter, proposal, and structure was given to Wild Bill Donovan, who was a Catholic, who was very aware of the dynamics between the Catholics and the Protestants because he grew up in a time where Catholics were viewed with a lot of suspicion. And so he took office, and everything that he and federal FDR and Winston Churchill did was on the secret. It had been planning and had been in planning stages since 1938, maybe earlier, all the way before FDR declared that we were being sucked into war by the Pearl Harbor accident. And so what happened after that is there was this OSS was set up, and it had 2,000 people, and offices for the OSS were set up in London, Cairo, North America, Burma, and Tibet. And there were plans for global expansion. And the purpose of the OSS was to to sabotage, to conduct espionage and counter-espionage in the enemy occupied or controlled territory, for the guerrilla warfare on behalf of the weaponization of religion. And what had happened was that during World War II, the US government had recruited a bunch of missionaries. And they recruited missionaries because these missionaries were accustomed to hardship. They spoke foreign languages. They had plausible reasons to live overseas. They established network. They were connected to American educational institutions. And they were educating the children of these politicians overseas. And so with this OSS, and other organizations, they decided the fastest way to set up a spy network was to use religion. And who was heading these spy enterprises was the psychopompous, again, as it were, the Jesuits, which is the FBI and the Catholic Church. The OSS assembled a team of anthropologists, historians, economists, socialists, all of these religionists, so that they could direct a global spy system to the world, and Jesuits were hired to direct this book. And you can read all about that in that book, the FBI and oh dear.
FBI and the Catholic Church.
Right. So okay, let me see here. So basically, the FBI and the Vatican pretty much directed operations for the OSS and eventually the CIA, and they used all of these missionaries and missionary organizations to direct this. And some of these missionaries eventually would reflect on the work that they did. The work that they did was to work and propagandize different leaders of different religions to provide arms, to work with opium addicts, to work with domestic abusers, to work with informants, and perhaps informants would be caught and executed. They would work with pedophiles, warlords, double cross. These are missionaries that are doing this work, and these missionaries were trained to kill in gruesome ways, to lie, steal, cheat, etc. So William Eddy, who was one of these Christian missionaries, he was an evangelical, he commented this on his work for the OSS. It is permitted to walk with the devil until you have crossed the bridge. The OSS was in a death struggle with the Gestapo, and like Churchill, we allied itself with devils to survive. We deserve to go to hell when we die. We used communists. We told them we would help to overthrow Franco, which we did not do. We false promised RIF Moorish officers to work for the independence of Morocco from Spain, and the OSS had no conscience. We have bought thousands of Moors with false promises and loose change, and it is an open question whether an operator in the OSS or in the CIA can ever again become a wholly honorable man. And you can read all about the exploits of these missionaries in this book called Double Cross, The Missionary Spies Who Spied for the United States During the Second World War. So I am going to talk, I think, let me see, I'd like to talk a little bit about the model that was used to export Christianity to the world. There was an idea that Roman Catholicism would be used, and of course it would be used by these Jesuits and by all these leaders who were Roman Catholics to become the model through which the intelligence community could understand and manipulate other world religions. And so Catholicism would be used as a prototype to blend other religions and to shape and mold other religions in the world. And in doing so, we would also affect how Americans thought and spoke of religion at home. So this process would serve to evangelize the world and evangelize the United States, as it were. So who belonged to this group? This group was, as I talked about, Aleister Crowley, the British government. It was comprised of atheists. It was comprised of Jesuits. It was comprised of the Time, Life, and Associated Press. At that time, Henry Luce was in charge of that, and Henry Luce was a big media mogul. He had grown up in a Christian home, but eventually I think he became just quite secular, and his Christianity really became a cultural background, but it wasn't really true conversion. And this religious approach was conducted from, I'm sorry, I keep doing this. This religious approach was conducted and it bridged across federal institutions, think tanks, private interest groups, the National Presbyterian Church, where Eisenhower and other administration officials were worshipped. And there were other Christian institutions like the World Council of Churches, the Presbyterian churches that partnered together to export Roman Catholic thinking in this, if you remember back to the beginning, the Febronianism, which is we're going to take all these little churches, we're going to instruct these little churches how to behave and think through Ratio Studiorum, all this learning. And then we are going to direct all of these churches, all of these beliefs to the mother church. And eventually there will be a one world think that will be happening. And so this all happened. This happened. And I'd like to give you a couple of ideas of what this looked like. I will talk about what, for example, the psychological warfare and the weaponization of weaponization of religion looked like in Cuba. Cuba, of course, after the US promised to be their savior, was turned into a dictatorship where it suffered a lot of bloody activity for a number of decades, and eventually they rebelled. And they tried to make peace with the United States, but the United States dictated such arbitrary and harsh terms that eventually they turned to the Soviets for help, and the US was furious with this. And so they planned to assassinate Castro. And so one of the plans for this was that the CIA was going to spread the word that the second coming of Jesus Christ was imminent, and that Jesus Christ was against Castro, who was the Antichrist. And all of this would be spread around Cuba, and that on a certain date, there would be an American submarine who would surface off of the horizon of Cuba and set up star shells, and this would be the manifestation of the second coming, and Castro would be overthrown. And somebody called this project the elimination by illumination. So this was the kind of thing that was happening all over the globe, from the OSS and from this conglomerate of civil and religious and secular groups. This continued through the CIA, and at the time, the CIA promoted the Zionist agenda, which had not been part of the American political scene for quite some time, but it became part of that. And the CIA also was very strange. They were run by the time by James Jesus Angleton, or James Jesus Angleton, who spent a lot of time in Italy and was maybe considered a Jesuit himself. He had weekly meetings with the Pope. He was friends with Kim Philby, who was one of the worst and most devastating spies in British history. People tried to alert him. He did nothing. He fraternized with socialists at times and allowed them to have certain freedoms. And it appears that he had his own head of CIA stations in Mexico murdered over the JFK situation, because this CIA head of station was blowing the whistle about CIA activity. And eventually, I'm just going to wrap this up pretty quickly here. We get to the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society was actually named after John Birch, who was one of the missionaries. And I just want to take a moment and say, maybe not every missionary was a corrupt missionary. I think there were two that this book named that maybe were working on behalf of the United States to the best of their abilities and were not exploiting or abusing their position as missionaries. And one of them was John Birch. That's my conclusion that I draw. And eventually, years later, the John Birch Society was founded, and there was a gentleman whose name was Robert Welch, and he was big on conspiracy theories, and he felt that America was having a huge moral decline after World War II. Well, of course, it happened after World War II because the Jesuits had instituted World War II, broke up society, and now there was all this societal decline. And Robert Welch felt like he was going to do something about it. So he started this society, and he talked about all the conspiracy theories. And there was a who's who of people who joined the John Birch Society. And eventually the John Birch Society would create the Tim LaHaye movement and the Left Behind movement and the Tea Party movement that we saw a few years ago. That at the same time, there was a gentleman who was part of the John Birch Society, and his name was Paul Weyrich. And Paul Weyrich was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation, and he was a Catholic. And Paul Weyrich eventually formed the Heritage Foundation with Ed Fuellner, and Ed Fuellner was attended the Jesuit College of Regis University, I believe, and was eventually on the board and was proud that it was a Jesuit university. And they are part of the Heritage Foundation. They were founders of the Heritage Foundation. And what I found very interesting, I'd like to share just one more minute here, and I think I'm going to be done. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, these guys founded a small public policy called the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation, as Joyce already pointed out, is one of the most significant groups to influence society for the conservative right. They have made significant inroads, and they partnered with different local charities. They partnered with as a Knight of Malta, a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, and they made all sorts of advancements through the conservative right, all sorts of policy changes on the conservative right that have eventually gotten us to this point of where we face the Sunday law. And let's see here if I can pull up his thesis, his PhD thesis, that is Ed Fuellner's of the Heritage Foundation. He basically wrote a thesis that said, we want to change society through politics. We are going to inform society through politics. We will break down the actions that need to be taken, and we are going to implement this through the conservative movement. And this PhD paper was called The Evolution of the Republican Study Committee. And that is what they did through the Heritage Foundation and religious organizations. And they did it through political movements such as this Republican study. And that is where we are today.
Wow, okay, thank you. So it just goes back to what Mrs. White wrote here about the United States forming an image of the beast. It says, in order for the United States to form an image of the beast, the religious power must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish her own ends. when the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. And so I realize that this document that they put out, this special report that the Heritage Foundation puts out, it sounds very innocent as far as there being a day of rest for the family to help the family, help the United States worker. But we know that this is something that is coming down through a Babylonian lens. And ultimately, it's always power. It is imperialism, uh, that is, it wants to control every aspect of our lives, including how we worship. And so we have seen, I've tried to share just a little bit about what the original Babylon was like, the church state interaction of Babylon and the empires that built upon it. And we have seen that that Babylonian power has never died. It it took over the church. It infiltrated the apostolic church. It it came into the Catholic Church and influenced the entire structure of that Catholic Church. And then I think it reinvigorated itself during the formation of the Jesuits and this counter Reformation. It had new life because it had this new enemy that it had to conquer. And Satan has been waiting to see how he's going to destroy the keepers of the sacred oracles.
Well, I think that's a really good summary, Joyce. And as you're summarizing that, I was thinking back to that word, the psychopompus or the soul director. And that is, of course, Satan's role through the churches and through the United States, because the United States was given a period of a probation, as it were. I mentioned earlier, to demonstrate what liberty looks like and what benevolent leadership looks like as a nation to the world. And we are having in the United States a lot of birthing pains, as it were, as we're losing this liberty. And I sometimes I'm caught up in the political left, political right dynamic, and I have to pull back and remember that there are, this psychopompus has used a lot of steps to get from freedom to tyranny. And these pains where we're directing our frustration and our anger with each other as church people, as from between churches, that is very misplaced energy that the psychopompus has used blown cover as cover. It has used secrecy and darkness as cover. It's used rational learning as cover. It's used and employed global operations and this Febronianism, which is have these little mini churches and direct the mini churches to look up to the major church. It's used a lot of verbal confusions
Yeah.
to get from the point of freedom to tyranny. And one of the most effective things that I think in the future maybe we can talk about, or maybe our friend Grace McIntosh can talk about, is the Hegelian dialectic. That is constantly using situations, constantly pitting this side against that side so that you can get a divided house and break America. And what has happened is that the Jesuits, in fact, have been very successful with their aims, very successful with their directing of the global souls, and they have used America and its freedoms as a sanctuary to direct everything, all attention to this day of worship. And now this day of worship is being used as it's being sold as the great moral solution to all the corruption that we're seeing in society, when it's the Jesuits that have engineered this corruption to begin with.
Well, I want to, since you brought it up, I just wanted to just maybe close with letting people know about some of that Hegelian dialectic that has been used, just so that we can identify that. Because I think that if we just like put that out there as an academic idea, a concept, that people might not be able to grasp it. For instance, I think the most recent issue that we're coming up against is this immigration concept, right? And so we see Christians who are on the political left versus the political right, and the issue is people think that immigration is such a complex, complicated subject, and that it's just really, really too difficult for us to figure out. But everyone's trying, and everyone is talking about this subject through the lens of their political party. And so you have people on the left now who are saying, who are really concerned about the cruelty that they're seeing the federal agents exercising against either immigrants or now citizens and this type of thing. And then you have people on the right who are saying we need to uphold the law. And there can be no communication between these two groups because one is saying that there's violence happening, and the other one is saying either they're saying it's not happening to that many people, it's kind of necessary. We have to use violence because these people are violent. And we are given this Hegelian dialectic that either, you have the option of your country being overrun by violent, illegal people,
who are
or
who are criminals,
who
because that
are who are criminals and that kind of thing, or what's the other option that we're being given?
or uphold the law, and it's just going to cost a few civil freedoms, just to uphold the law, or these people wouldn't have their civil freedoms transgressed if they had obeyed and gotten out of here when they were supposed to in the first place.
Right. And so what's going to end up happening is now you have no conversation happening between the two groups. And
Mhm.
so there is going to be violence and bloodshed, and you're going to end up with a police state,
Mhm.
which is what they want, and like which is what we see happening in Minneapolis. And so we're not saying what is right or wrong. I understand that some of the things that have happened, I think that there is definitely, uh, there is an agenda. There
Yeah.
is intentionality. Anytime you see all the major news broadcasting stations covering the same thing and trying to play on our emotions here, you know that this is something that they are wanting to accomplish a certain objective. And so I would ask our people, I would ask Christians to, as they are looking at this climate here, to understand that while these are very, very real issues, very real incidents that are happening, there is an intentionality that at the end of this, there will be violence and bloodshed. But at the end of it, you will hate your brother and sister, and the government will have even more control of you.
Hmm. Well, and another example of the Hegelian dialectic that we were just talking about with our friend Davy, who sometimes moderates with us on here, um, is the Epstein files and the conditioning that we are receiving from the Epstein files, where we are beginning to talk about in very common, ordinary language about things that are so corrupt, so diabolical, so broken, that it's becoming everyday to us. And I saw a Chinese news report that was discussing the Western elite profligacy that is the Epstein files, and how degraded and denigrated our society has become. And I thought that's very interesting. So the world itself is being conditioned by the Epstein file information as well, to think, oh, the US is so corrupt and so immoral. We need purity, we need morality, and we are going to welcome a state of affairs where we have a moral conditioning because obviously that country and those citizens need it. When in fact, some of this stuff was brought on by the Jesuits themselves.
Well, that's why I wanted to share what happened in Babylon, because a lot of those things started in Babylon with these pagan practices. And they have been hidden for general consumption, I think, to a certain extent in a Christian society. But now you see that they are coming out more and more in the open. And we are being conditioned, as you said, to accept that and to maybe even make it something that we laugh at or something that we feel hopeless about, but we're not really able to do something about it in a real sense as far as making sure that people take responsibility for these things. So it just there are these dialectics that are being pushed at our people. We saw it during COVID, for instance. You only have these two options, and that's it. And so I hope that people understand some of that is happening, as well as just what's happening in the educational system. That you know, Satan's people are teaching our young people in
Mhm.
the educational systems. And so that is why when your children leave the home, go to these schools, many times they end up coming back and you do not recognize the person that your child has become.
We're really at an intersection of freedom and tyranny and having the two ideas conflated. Now the beast system is going to dictate to us what is freedom. Freedom is morality in the national day of rest. And freedom is a family, and it is abstaining from commercial exercise, when in fact the idea that is the counter reformation of freedom. But the reformation idea of freedom is something very different. That is the ability to live God's image as an overcomer. That's why Revelation 3 says, to him that overcomes I will grant XYZ. And there is a perfect world to overcomers. There is moral purity in overcomers. There is religious freedom. There is the ability for the American society to have lived with all of these different ideas and different people for the past 250 years in religious tolerance and civil tolerance, without the dragon speaking or without the dragon redefining our morality for us. And
So, okay. So I was thinking, Natalie, we have to let people know, what can we do now? What is it that
yes.
God's people are to do to share the fourth angel's message to come out of Babylon, my people?
Okay. So this is a book. If you are a non-Adventist or a Catholic, this is a book that we give out that discusses civil and religious freedom through a global panorama over time, and how eventually the end game will start in the United States and spread out to the globe. It discusses how we received that freedom, who spoke into it, all the different leaders. It discusses America's involvement. It discusses all the leaders. Well, I shouldn't say all, it discusses many leaders and of the global movement of the Protestant Reformation. And it discusses how to have and bear the image of God. And I think at this point, we need to take personal accountability for our own moral development, walk with the Lord, spend that time with the Lord every day, and plead for Him to transform us into His image, which is what He wants to do. And this book will give you a historical basis and a civic basis for understanding how to do that. And it will also unfold some prophetic events of the future that everyone will want to be aware of.
Amen. So where can they get that great controversy?
Well, you can get this book online. There, it's on YouTube in audio form. It is online. You can Google The Great Controversy and get it on Amazon.com. And if you have a Seventh-day Adventist friend, hopefully they will have one or many. And if you are a Seventh-day Adventist, I urge you to give one to everyone in your community. Go to all the protests you can, both on the left and the right, and to give out the great controversy, and partner with whomever you can to give this book out to people. And most of all, I would say we could pray. We should pray. And we should get our church involved, and our church is involved
Hmm.
in passing out this book and purchasing this book and forwarding this book to everyone and just spreading it as the leaves of autumn.
Amen. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I hope that, hope that that has been of help. It's good to look back at history. I know that some people are going to think that some people might feel a little uncomfortable spending a lot of time talking about the Jesuits. I know that there are some groups within Seventh-day Adventism that tend to focus a lot on these more conspiratorial types of things. But I do think that it is worth looking into. I think that the conspiracy is real. There is a conspiracy against the truth and against the keepers of the truth. I think that we saw all throughout COVID just how history is being rewritten. And so we really do have to pay attention to these things and know that we have an enemy who is working to deceive us.
Yeah.
COVID was very complicated in a way. COVID was very difficult to kind of navigate through. And I think that the Sunday law issue is going to be even more difficult to navigate through. It's not going to be just cut and dry, black and white, very easy. This is what is right or wrong. There is a reason why churches were split. There's a reason why families were split.
Mhm.
We don't know. We have to be really on our knees to be prepared for what's about to happen.
Well, yes, I agree with that. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been saying for 150 plus years that there would be a national Sunday law. And here it is. There is no conspiracy. If people want to understand how we got to this point, then you have to look at the history. You have to understand the past. And you have to make sense and connect the dots to be prepared and to understand the mind of the beast. We have to understand what the beast is and how it is going to act in order that we can avoid that. And we need to understand God's mind and understand his image so we can live that and reflect that. And if we don't understand what the issues are, then we are going to say, oh, it makes perfect sense to rest on Sunday and to stop burdening the earth of all of this carbon footprint that we're creating by commercialism. Or it's going to make perfect sense to worship on Sunday because everybody's bad and we need to start being good and start respecting the family. Whatever political side you fall on, you are going to agree with the beast system if you don't understand what the issues are, if you don't understand the psychopompus, as it were, the soul director, and if you don't understand how he's going to lead. So I personally, when people discuss, oh, you are so conspiratorial, I think, no, this is history in the happening right now, and we all need to understand it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who's been here with us. Please, again, if you could, like and share, subscribe to the channel. It would very much help us out. And yeah, let people know if this has been a blessing for you. And Natalie, could you just give us a short prayer as we close?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, I just ask that you would please work with all of us, Lord. Please send your eyes to and fro in the human family, and please rescue those who are genuine of heart. Lord, even for those leaders who are New World leaders who are on Satan's side, you have said that those who are closest to the throne of Satan, you will pull them out and you will give them a new opportunity. I pray for salvation for them too, that they would accept. Lord, there would be nothing better than a happy ending as you have promised in heaven. And I just ask that each listener would be working on that plan and that we would walk and abide with you in a daily and real way. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Natalie. God bless everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.